Good day everyone, and most welcome to this webinar from Telenor IoT, where we're going to discuss some findings and conclusions from the very exciting Mobile World Congress Anno 2026 that we've been visiting last week. My name is Martin Whitlock, CTO at Telenor IoT, and I will be your guide and host in this webinar, but luckily I'm not alone, and I have a good panelist of colleagues and friends from the industry with me. And actually, first out, I have Bengt Nordström, a long-term veteran in the industry, and this is not your first rodeo, so to say, in MWC, I know. But please introduce yourself, Bengt.
Yes, so you're right. Thank you, Martin. And you're right. It was my 33rd Mobile World Congress. So I started in 1990. So I've been following. I missed a few, but been to most of them.
That's amazing, and perfect for this session then. And now you are working as an analyst at Analysys Mason, right?
Yes, senior advisor to Analysys Mason.
Perfect.
I passed the analyst stage.
Oh, yeah, it's the ladder. Yeah, I heard about that one. Anyways, so Bengt is going to start off and share some insights from the event, and after that I will join back again together with some additional colleagues. But please, Bengt, fire away.
Thank you, Martin. So we begin to look at this event, and I'm grateful that you invited me. So I look very much forward to me giving the opportunity to present and also then have this panel with you. So if we move to the agenda here, I'd like to start with to do first of an overview of the Mobile World Congress overall. Then talk a bit about the state of the cellular IoT market. We did that last year, and I have updated that material so you can see where we stand compared to other sectors of the industry. And then finally move to IoT technology trends, the ones that I thought was sort of most interesting and relevant down in Barcelona. So if we move to the next one, the MWC 26 recap. So overall it was super well attended, 105,000 people, 2,900 exhibitors from 207 countries and territories, and with a whole bunch of analysts and journalists attending as well. So very successful sort of event from that perspective, basically the same size as last year. Then catching up on what I thought overall was most interesting, the GSMA that is organizing the event, they labeled this the IQ era, and that was shining through the whole event. So that basically means AI in anything and everywhere in the industry, and there were 6 pillars underlying this theme, and it's from regulatory, technology, process, everything. It stuck me after a while that you're so overwhelmed by AI messages that it's hard to comprehend how to interpret it really. But anyway, that's an important trend. Then what I thought was very fascinating is that 5G is beginning to live up to the expectations we had for the technology 7 years ago when it was launched. So the vibe, the spirit of the event was much more positive than last year. I think last year we were talking like, why aren't we having new revenue stream? Why isn't the industry growing? But this year, I think a number of things have fallen into place. We have 5G standalone deployment that is growing steadily. That allows for RedCap. We have network slicing. We have network APIs. So all of that sort of is coming into place, and it's giving opportunities for the industry to grow. So the spirit was much more positive. And that also means that if we last year with sort of fear talked about 6G, this time around it was like we understand why there will come a new technology 4 years from now and why we possibly need that. Doesn't mean complete replacement, of course, but when you have sort of can build use cases and stories around current 5G, then you can also have a story of why the industry need to evolve to a new standard in some years. And then particularly in 6G, I got a bit excited about something called sensing, or ISAC, integrated sensing and communications, which is a new standard from 3GPP, which sort of gives like radar-like capabilities in mobile networks, sort of the combination of connectivity and radar-like capabilities. That I think is a very promising opportunity that I will monitor closely over the next coming years. So that was sort of the overall recap. If we then move to the next slide, which is the state of the cellular IoT market. And what you see here are three diagrams. The darker blue one represents where the market was in 2024, and the lighter blue is where we expect the industry to be in 2029, and all this is based on analysis Mason research. So if we begin to look at the left-hand side, the number of connections, we can see that on mobile broadband, if we start with that, that's sort of showing maturity sign. It's still growing with a 2% CAGR. But if we then look at IoT, we actually have a good connectivity growth. And the good news with that, of course, is that that is not anywhere near maturity. That is a sector that we can expect to grow with like 10% or more for many, many years to come. If we then look at, on the top right diagram, revenue trend follows the similar pattern as the last diagram, and it means that mobile broadband is growing slowly, reaching maturity stage. We have fixed wireless access, the middle diagram, which are showing nice growth, but where we, for capacity reasons, can expect it to reach maturity maybe 2, 3, 4 years from now. And then back to IoT, which is the fastest growing of these three sectors. And again, with my comment on that, it's very likely that it will continue on that path for many years to come. And then the last diagram in this slide, which is about how cellular IoT penetrates various industry verticals. And there I think we have very encouraging trends where we see double-digit growth in most sectors. And again, as usual, utilities and automotive are very strong sectors here. I think that's very interesting because when you walked around in Barcelona at the FIRA, it was very obvious that you have very high presence of industry verticals. They are not only there as visitors, they are there as contributors with their own booths and so forth. So good progress for this industry in industry verticals. And if we then move to the final slide, IoT technology trends. And you know, this is not easy to select because there are so many cool things happening in this industry that you really can get excited about. But I've then chosen three. And the first one here is called flexibility. And I put that label because what I really like to talk about here is the SGP.32 standard, the eSIM for IoT standard. And what it really means for the industry is that it gives flexibilities that we haven't had in the past. And again, when you walk around the booths and looked at presentations, eSIM had very, very high profile and attention. So many interesting demos, many interesting launches, many interesting concepts. And if you compare then with the normal consumer market, their eSIM is like have a disruptive impact because it has disrupted the roaming market. People can travel to different regions and pay much lower fees. I think in the IoT market, it has more like what I call here in the second bullet, an insurance policy, an insurance, operational insurance for the industries. Because what eSIM really means for them, that it can significantly lower cost for deployment, configuration, and stock keeping of products. And it was very noticeable in Barcelona that how appreciated that is, for instance, for the automotive sector. So it really means that you can reduce the number of stock keeping units, and you can decide at a much later point which configuration, for which market you're going to deliver your product, and that is millions in savings for the industry. But what I thought also was interesting in that context is that then if we sort of then reduce the complexity in the front end with changing physical SIM cards and having many different stock keeping units, you sort of shift the complexity to the back end, to the control and orchestration layer. So there was a lot of talk in Barcelona. So now how do you actually benefit from the eSIM? Well, then you need platform support that allows you to manage connectivity, decisions of connectivity, change of SIM card and so forth in a swift fashion. So that's something to pay attention to when you're selecting your eSIM vendor, so to speak. Make sure that there is a management system behind it that allows you to orchestrate this effectively. So second point is what I call here hybrid connectivity, and that is of course about satellite, which has huge attention in the industry now, across the industry of consumer, B2B market and IoT. I would say in consumer market it has somewhat of a flavor again to being a competitor to operators, and that was very obvious when Starlink SpaceX bought MSS spectrum in January this year, and AT&T's share price fall at least momentarily. Now I think the industry have sobered up a bit and think maybe it is not really a competitive threat. It's more like an opportunity. And for the cellular IoT market, it's not so much Starlink or AST Space Mobile that are sort of the contenders. Here is more Viasat and Skylo that are leading the race. Again, very interesting demos, commercial launches, chipsets being available and support and everything else. So this is definitely a growing sector. And the good thing about it is that if the baseline here is that you have terrestrial coverage in sort of normal mobile network, here you get the addition of filling the coverage holes, providing resilience. If you take a disaster event like earthquake, when normal sites are maybe collapsing, then you can actually rely on satellite connectivity. So it's a very, very important and good addition for the industry. Similar to the eSIM discussion, that comes back then to now you have that capability. How do you manage it? In which markets does it work? Which terrestrial network is complementing what satellite solution? And how do you manage handoff, SLAs and so forth? So there's a lot of interesting complexities in that direction where you need to focus on orchestration. Then the final point is security, super high focus and attention to security. And I think you can relate that to satellite, you can relate that to eSIM, because as you make things more open, more programmable, remote control, it also put even more stringent requirements on security, and there was a lot of attention on that in Barcelona. And I think we definitely come to the stage now that security is not something you add on. Security is something that is embedded in system, in design from the beginning. That's the only way to achieve secure solutions. And then it comes also a shift in discussion, I sense. Now it's not about shipping a module or a solution that has security. It's about how can you ensure security throughout the lifetime of a product. So it's continuous security from shipment to end of life of a product. And that again had very high attention, and that means we need to upgrade, we need to control throughout the lifetime of a product. That had very high focus. And then you can also see that there's a lot of standardization work from regulatory bodies, governments, industry bodies and so forth, which are setting a lot of standards that everyone needs to follow. So that I think is, again, if I would give a recommendation to enterprises to listen to this, is that make sure that the products you buy from your IoT vendor are compliant with the standards that have been developed. And in the best case, that is sort of pre-integrated, pre-tested before you buy it. I also attended a quantum security event, which I thought was interesting. And that is sort of not commercial today, but it's when you listen to that, you realize how important it is, because the number of hacks and malware, I think I have 450,000 quoted here in this presentation. I've seen even higher number from other researchers. They are of course looking to use quantum computing to crack current systems. So it's a race for the industry to come before the bad guys. So if the bad guys are getting worse through quantum, the good guys like us has to become better and be before them with quantum technology. It's not happening in 2026, but it's something very important to follow. I think that is concluding my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bengt. It's our pleasure to have you here, and good to hear that it was not only kava and tapas for you. You actually seem to have been picking up quite a few technology trends as well in your
doing my best. Thank you.
So now we are approaching the next phase of this webinar, where we're going to open up for some questions. First, I have a number of questions for a panel, and I'm going to invite Luciana and Seth on the stage here. And while you come up, I also want to make a pitch that it's not only me asking questions today. You have also the opportunity online to post questions. You can do that in the chat or in the tool for the webinar. And we will try to pick those questions up during the session today. But first, welcome Luciana and Seth.
Thank you.
Luciana, we start with you. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Luciana with Ingran. I'm Chief Legal and Commercial Officer for Telenor Connection.
Thank you. Nice to have you here. And Seth?
My name is Seth Riding. I'm the Chief Sales Officer for what we call global sales. So I run the sales and business development organization outside the Nordics. And that means that we have presence in North America, UK, Europe, South Africa, and we also have teams in Asia where sort of Japan, China, and Korea are the main focus markets. So we have teams on the ground in these markets.
Perfect. So first out, some hypometer temp check here. Start with you, Luciana. Do you have like 3 words that summarize your visit to Barcelona this time?
Absolutely. From vision to execution. I think a bit about the 5G cases, you can really see it more concrete.
Excellent. Vision to execution. It puts some pressure on all of us, I guess. Bengt, do you have similar? Do you have any?
Well, I already mentioned, I think, AI, 5G platform improvement. That's 3 words, but you know what I mean. And then security.
Important topics.
Yes.
Hold on. Seth?
I would say increased data needs. I think that the dependency of a seamless connectivity and being constantly online, and also being able to do more sort of calculations, algorithms continuously really drives the consumption. I was thinking of that when Bengt showed sort of the development on the market. This is not only about increased number of devices, it's also extensive data increase per device.
That's interesting, and maybe sort of linked to that, but potentially from a different angle. Bengt mentioned satellite and how that is now coming in and complementing the terrestrial networks that we used to have. What would you say from your perspective that is the biggest hurdle in adding satellite into the portfolio of connected IoT devices?
Well, I think first of all, the hurdle has, it has decreased significantly. I think with the new technologies and also being able to sort of implement them in a seamless way on the same kind of device is making things much easier. But also then looking at different verticals, and I was thinking of excavators, for example, or mining areas. I mean, historically, the providers, we have Hitachi as a global customer. I mean, they're providing excavators on a global scale, but in some areas, obviously, the satellite coverage has been something that they have been dependent on, and they've been forced into a situation where they have to choose different providers for that kind of connectivity. So I think that the threshold is definitely decreasing, and but it's new market to sort of cover, to get into, and it's something that needs to be, from our side, I think, consolidated in how it's offered.
But I think that's the beauty of the technology coming in now, with the NTN networks that are 3GPP compliant.
Yes.
We've had satellite in our portfolio for quite some time, but it's been a different device, a different value chain in that sense, and didn't really scale well or have synergies with the other connected devices. So I think that's what's new and that's what's interesting.
Yeah.
I was thinking the same, but actually now for us, I mean, we have much a lower hurdle because, I mean, it is the same as adding any other roaming provider to our, I mean, offer. So it becomes very easy to simply add that option now.
Yeah. But also understanding what kind of satellite it is. I mean, where does it have cover at what times, or is it something that is sort of standardized over time in a specific region? So I think depending on what kind of use case you have and also where you are originating from or where it's going to be deployed, there are different things to keep in mind while you do your planning before the execution and rollout.
Exactly, and maybe for the enterprises it's more about also designing their solution, right? Because still it is a more expensive solution, so you have to use maybe for the fringe cases as a complementing what they already have today.
Bengt, do you think there are any particular hurdles?
I think that one thing that caught my attention is the geopolitical angle to this, which I think we have to follow. I mean, a lot of the satellite ambitions are coming from the US. And then when SpaceX and Starlink bought the MSS spectrum for $17 billion in January, that formed like an MSS spectrum race or battle that is not settled yet. I think the big seven, Mag 7 companies, they have the deep pockets to buy all MSS spectrum if they like. And there is a realization of that is probably not a great idea if you think in sovereign terms and so forth. And then to that point, that means also most of the technology around this is not coming from the 3GPP industry. It's coming from the Mag 7 players.
So the 3GPP is more like a bolt-on, you say, on top of existing satellite infrastructure?
Or watching when everything around technology for satellite is not coming from Ericsson, Nokia, or Huawei. Right? I'm not sure it's a threat or how, but it's something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and I think you can already now see that there are some different sort of ecosystems forming, right, for the satellite connectivity, and that may, from my perspective, be one of the hurdles actually for enterprises who want to start to utilize satellite. That you have the LEO versus GEO, which in one sense requires different device capabilities and so on, and I think maybe that's the sign of the times that we're in right now. It's quite early phase yet, I would say, with the NTN networks. But it's exciting. I'm sure it will have an important role to play, as you mentioned, as a coverage gap fill and for potential redundancy and so on. But maybe with that, this is the year that we're going to see the first trials or first level of commercial deployments take place. But maybe it's for the coming years to scale. That's my view, at least.
No, I agree completely with you. It's super hyped. So but if you look at on the normal sort of consumer market, it's not that T-Mobile or Verizon, AT&T has massive numbers of satellite users and that are paying a lot of money. It's sort of, you can see it's really early stage, but it's launched.
Yeah,
so
it is.
Sort of starting now, but then growing 27, 28, something like that.
Interesting.
But you'll also get to a tipping point when it comes to the cost of the actual device, and sort of when that comes down, then all of a sudden you get the momentum in the rollout, and then it takes off.
For sure. Moving on then to another topic that Bengt was talking about as well, security. And turning to you now, Seth. Security is no longer a differentiator, it has to be embedded and so on. From a customer dialogue perspective, do you sense that this is something that is being brought up with customers? When is security coming into the discussions? Is this proactively asked for? Or?
I would say that it's not as proactively asked for as it probably should be. And I think it varies quite a bit between different verticals also, sort of how mature the vertical is and also where you're going to roll this out. At the same time, we as a company, especially with Luciana as a support and drive here, we're doing quite a lot of work when it comes to trying to educate about the importance of understanding this part. I think definitely if you come price or security, price comes first in the dialogue, but in the different phases of a sales cycle, you definitely get into the security and sort of the compliance discussions later on. And seeing it from a truly global point of view, the requirements are different. I mean, you can see Europe as one sort of unified union in a way, but if you look at the requirements that are in Europe with GDPR as an example, but moving then to either China or Africa or other areas, understanding the differences and how you're actually compliant in these ones. If you're going to roll out a in-car infotainment solution, for example, where you provide local content, how do you do that? What does it take to be fully compliant? It's a very different thing between different markets, and really understanding that is something that is a bit of a challenge. But I would say, as you said, Bengt, I mean, the automotive industry is in the forefront of sort of the rollout of the technical capabilities, but they're also at the same time pushing the boundaries in terms of testing what is regulatory needed. So, and I think you can probably add more to that.
Yeah, I think it is more a question of data governance, right? That customers are very concerned about how do they handle data. And then you have, of course, privacy and personal data. This will have a lot of maturity in the industry, but now we're seeing more and more concerns about industrial M2M data, which is data really generated by a massive amount of devices. And then this is also shifting in the world, and it becomes actually as sovereignty and security questions, where we see some regulators having a tendency to mandate localization and local processing. So this has a very big impact on enterprises and how they are then designing their solutions, and that they can do that with scale. So this is definitely in the mind of the customers, and we get this type of questions.
And then it's down to, you mentioned, talk about price. And what is the price or cost for security and what for not having it? I think that's also something to ponder about, right?
Well, I think we saw, from the research that I had in my slide, that if we have good penetration of IoT solutions in critical industry verticals, these are all verticals that it would be a disaster if you were hacked or cyber crimes were. And I really was struck by that in Barcelona, how that sector is growing, the number of bad guys that are trying to hack our systems. So super important topic.
But I think, there is a range of different use cases. It can be life-critical use cases, or it can be things that are mandatory by a government or something else. So there can be an impact for the individual or society, but also the impact for a business in terms of penalties, or if you're stopping services from working. We had the Jaguar Land Rover that was hacked. I think that the production site stood still for a month. It's measured in billions.
Yes.
So, there are a few cases that really showcases that taking this really serious is of great importance, and the cost of not investing in it proactively can be massive.
Yes. And then linked to security might be general compliance to regulation and other things. And I want to turn to you now, Luciana, because it was discussed a little bit here before, but compliance to regulation, is that something that you can outsource to a partner, or do you have to dig into the details yourself, or how do you do that as an enterprise?
It's a tricky question.
Yes.
I would say that you can outsource part of it, right? You can agree on both commercial and liability models where you're able to outsource part of your compliance obligations. If you take, for instance, we have a service called IoT Drive, which is for automotive, for car OEMs that like to provide infotainment, internet access services, which is a regulated service. So we are able to take over the regulatory obligation for these services. But of course, you can never, as an enterprise, outsource all your compliance obligation. And at the end, if you are an enterprise putting a service in the market, the regulators, they're going to look at you, for accountability and to really ensure that the service is compliant. So parts of it. Yes.
Parts of it, yeah. So that requires to have good partners maybe to discuss that with and to understand what parts, right? So that it's no gaps.
Exactly.
Yeah. You mentioned it, Bengt, that MWC this year was dubbed like the IQ era, right? And that's a nice word, has a nice ring to it. Maybe you could even call it a buzzword.
Maybe.
Maybe. But if you look beyond the buzzword, like, did you see any specific AI-driven IoT use cases that you would like to raise in that context?
No, I tell you, Martin, what my observation is here. If you take this angle, that Jensen Huang is an amazing entrepreneur and an amazing engineer, but also an amazing salesperson. So that means wherever he lands in the world, data centers full of GPUs are built without a business case, just because he has sold the vision. And I think it means that we are trying to use GPUs, large language models, for whatever we see. And I think for our industry, I'm not convinced that it's the right approach. This is something that should go back to something we talked about last year. You know, what business problem do I like to solve? What data do I need to have to solve that business problem? And what are the technologies behind and architecture behind that will solve that business problem? And in our industry, which is super competitive, from platform to between you and your competitors, devices and everything, we cannot just throw in GPUs in everything. It would just make the cost much higher. So this sort of sensible approach to AI is what I'm hooked on, you know. Selecting the right, I don't think there would be more a market where models are sort of designed and made for purpose, you know. And our industry, for energy, for cost reasons, need very, very efficient AI solutions. So that is I saw, sometimes when I saw presentations that just were based on using large language models, then I got a bit, this is not a good idea. And when I saw other approaches, I like, yes, these guys have understood what it means.
But that's interesting. Am I too bold to make a sort of a parallel with what you mentioned now with building GPU centers first, and maybe what actually the 5G SA launch also was about, because it was talked about the use cases of 5G standalone and the promise of it, and then we need to caught up building networks and business models along the way. Do you recognize that?
Yes, no, it's quite simple. I think it's the normal case of we are overestimating short term the impact of a new technology, and then we are underestimating the long term impact. So there's nothing strange, but this is sort of goes a little bit beyond that.
Yeah.
I think.
And on that, on understanding or estimating or expecting outcomes of AI set, would you see a difference in that from a global perspective, different regions that have a different approach to AI these days, or anything you noticed? Any part of the world that leads the race in terms of IoT AI?
I mean, what I've seen personally, I think, there is a large adoption in China.
Yeah.
I personally visited the operations center in Shenzhen in southern China, where obviously there is a massive rollout of surveillance cameras, which gives you a great opportunity to apply AI technology when you're getting a lot of data. So surveillance cameras, drones, and so on, proactively monitoring like trash bins, like are they overloaded, and by that getting things to happen to sort of empty those trash bins, or cars being parked in wrong ways and so on. So I think China is definitely the forefront, and also how they in a way do massive rollout. This is going to be a smart city. Then you have a SIM card in every light post in the whole city. So like taking that kind of stance where you proactively invest into something that gives you an opportunity to really drive AI across the board, I would say.
And I personally see that we've seen the use of AI or machine learning models to like digest the massive amount of IT data. That has been like a marriage that's been ongoing for some time. I think maybe what was added this year in Mobile World Congress, and coming back to the IQ era, is the agentic AI, where you may actually hand out responsibilities or autonomy
Yeah.
to the AI engines. Bengt, do you see anything here, anything that enterprises are already now starting to prepare for, or is it more of an interest in it? Or
No, it comes back to my previous comment a bit. It will have a huge impact. If you think of how an organization is managing a fleet, a lot of the tasks that are done manually today or by staff can be automated. So the cost and operational benefits are absolutely there. Then I have to say that the starting point for most enterprises is not a blank sheet of paper. You start with your legacy IT telco stack, and on that you have to implement agentic AI. So I'm excited about it, but I also have a lot of respect for what it means to go from legacy to introduce new capabilities. So it's something that will have a huge impact, but gradual, incremental.
And that's probably wise as well. I personally like to see agentic AI, like you have suddenly access to hundreds of junior analysts that are eager to deliver value, and they just run, and it might be great, but you also need some level of understanding what the output is, and maybe some human filtering on top still to get the full value. But at the same time, if someone in your competition finds a way to mobilize those hundreds of eager junior analysts, then you probably need to consider it yourself. Otherwise, you'll be left behind.
But yeah, go ahead, please.
No, but there is also, I think, another part to add to this. One is the sort of the legacy systems that you have in-house, but the other part is also that coverage varies quite differently across the world. I mean, we talk about MWC, we talk about 5G, SA, and all these technologies. They are not rolled out everywhere. It's important to be aware of that, and especially if you're doing if you're aiming for a global rollout, you need to understand what is actually going to work in the different regions where you're present, and adding sort of the regulatory compliances that are needed in the different parts. So it's quite complex.
And on that complexity, you also
Yes.
have regulation, right?
Yeah.
Luciana, and with the EU Cyber Resilient Act and other regulation coming in play, how would an enterprise approach that from a life cycle management perspective?
It's a good question. I think it's connected to what you were talking about, Bengt, earlier. I also think that now it's important that when enterprise is designing their products, they think through the entire life cycle that that product or service needs to be compliant. So they need to embed also flexibility on the design. And by the way, it's not only CRA, you have different types of regulation, you have really this more horizontal data regulations. You have AI Act, we have CRA, and we also have NIS2. So I think all of them are connected together. And this is in Europe. And then if you also take other countries which are considering more like mandating of localization, of data because of security. So it becomes quite a challenge for enterprises to really design their solution in a effective and scalable way. I mean, if you think about cars, right? Today, I mean, we talk about cars, but you could also see them as like a data center, right? And this data center is moving between countries. So they need to be able to ensure that they are secure during their like maybe 10 years of existence, and that consider that in each country it might be so that regulation is changing and the requirements are changing. So it's super important to consider that when you're designing the service and maintaining the service.
And for truly global deployments, that might sometimes mean that you need to restrict yourself maybe to services that are commonly available or allowed from a global perspective, unless you have the ability to manage differentiated service sets on your connected devices in different markets.
Yes.
Which adds complexity also in its sense, but definitely something to think about. And going back to you, Seth, you mentioned before that not all technologies are available everywhere, right? And I guess similar to the not all regulation is the same everywhere. But how does that apply to our customers, and how can we help navigating that somehow, and how do you do when you discuss it with customers?
I think first of all, it's for us to have a good understanding of what they're trying to achieve. I think a few years back we had a transformation from selling a product to selling a service. And that as a responsibility or the way of work as a company that is providing that took a massive transformation. And I think now shifting in towards the SGP32 era, that's also a transition. We mentioned the word insurance here, and I think everybody has an insurance independently of what it is for. The intention is not to use it, but you might be forced into a situation where you have to use it. And if you have a single pane of glass or an orchestration layer, then it creates an opportunity beneath that to actually switch between identities when it comes to SIM cards or regulatory challenging markets or whatever it might be. But I think prior to getting to that, you want to, as long as possible, I would say, try to stick with a provider, because the transformation from one to another on the highest level is quite painful.
Yeah.
And we talk a bit about also fully understanding the effects of doing this. There is one thing to say that I switch from one network to another. You're switching providers, you're switching invoices, you're switching API integrations, you're switching from one regulatory information source to another. The whole system, it's almost like an ecosystem that you're switching between, and you need to think that through carefully about how you really go about it. But as an enabler, when it comes to switching between networks or whatever is needed, it is a great thing. But I think that there's a lot of learnings to be made for us as an industry, and obviously for us to sort of try to express that to our customers and the people that we're talking to fully understand, so this happens in a good way. So but it's definitely a shift that is in the making.
And that boils down maybe to the orchestration. You mentioned it being part of it, and goes on all the new technologies that are introduced, but also SGP32, I guess. Otherwise, it sounds like a heart surgery on your total operations. Is that true? Yeah.
No, absolutely. I mean, the sort of maybe the intuition when you hear eSIM, that you can use any network sounds great. But then when you think about it, well, do I have a roaming agreement with that one? What is the coverage of the players? And there are so many, a whole set of questions that need to be answered. And maybe, you can say that's, in a way, that's where agentic AI can also play a role, because it can have the intelligence to switch connectivity to something that is agreed that you can do it. So it's like the NOCs going forward will monitor agentic AI rather than the network nodes themselves.
No, I think it's great that you noticed this and you brought it up, Bengt, because it resonates well with our own findings. We've been working with the SGP32 for almost 2 years now, launching it, and of course getting the technology in place is one thing. That's like system integration, but we spent a lot of time on building these orchestration capabilities on top, where personally I think the majority of the complexity lies. But that's part of our launch, and we were happy to be among the first actually to launch it.
I also think that we forget the commercial orchestration that it is needed. If you think about roaming, how many years did it take, right, to orchestrate it commercially? And now, I mean, we have a well-tested working commercial model. So the same goes also for SGP32. I mean, there is also the commercial orchestration behind that needs to be in place so that it becomes a good solution.
And finally, on the topic of new technologies, we've been talking about satellite and so on, but RedCap, that was also popping up here and there. Do you have any observations on that?
Yes, absolutely. I think it was sort of on the list to qualify on the last slide, but then security and eSIM came before it. No, I think this is really connected to the first point I make, that it has taken longer time than we hoped for to get 5G standalone in place. Now progression is quite good, and more operators are having that capability. There's been some issues on the device side, but that is gradually being sorted out as well. And that opens up for RedCap. And I think I can't remember now from the top of my head when NB-IoT was mentioned and launched first time, but it's probably 15 years ago, right?
Could be. Yeah.
And you know, they didn't really take off as a super important standard. Now with RedCap we have something that once it is in place, it can have a huge impact, a very positive addition to your offerings, I think. And what was good in Barcelona was that you know, there were many demos, many trials, chipsets becoming available and so forth. So we are at the beginning of the commercialization of RedCap, I think. And it will be super interesting to follow that development, you know, what it will look like 27, 28, 29. So somewhere there it will be a very important addition to the portfolio of connectivity solutions the industry has.
I think you're right about the timelines. Then I also heard that we have now passed 10 million shipped chipsets, and the modules are going down in price towards from maybe 10 US last year to maybe 8 towards the end of this year. So things are starting to move, but I agree it's about the availability of the networks and everything as well, right? Moving topic a little bit, digital twin was on the agenda for MWC this year as well. I would say it's been talked about previously as well. Do you see, Bengt, that the 5G networks are now mature enough to start to fulfill this to the promise of the industry, or have any observations there?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say I have an observation here, Martin, and that is that sometimes we have been a bit too obsessed with latency in this industry, because the latency we have today in a 4G, 5G network is actually very well equipped to support digital twin based services in a factory, as long as the use case we talk about, the monitoring that you do of a manufacturing process, is not counted in low milliseconds. So the networks and the technologies we have, they are supporting this. It's more like all the other things that need to fall into place for delivering a digital twin based service in an enterprise. So I don't think latency itself is the limitation here. Then of course, as 5G progresses, and now I mentioned 6G, you know, then you get down to sub-millisecond latency. And of course there are use cases for that when in high precision manufacturing, you know, nanomillimeter precision, you know, of tools and everything else. Then you need a technology, but for a vast majority of cases, we can support digital twin-based services today.
That's interesting. Yeah, I didn't pick up that, and maybe actually the absence of discussions of latency is notable in itself. It wasn't even much discussed in satellite dialogues, which maybe it should be. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, you're nodding. You agree?
No, I mean it varies so much on what kind of use case you're looking into, and I think the general availability of networks in relation to that, but also how points of presence have sort of been deployed across the globe, which means that the physical distance is normally shorter between the point of presence that you're connecting to. So I think it serves the general purpose in a really good way for the majority of services that are out there today, and then there are niche products. And it was the same thing sort of when technologies were, NB-IoT was mentioned here before. I mean, you need to, especially if you're going to do, which we and my organization are focusing on, global deployments, what is generally available. And it takes quite some time until that actually happens. So you need to focus on a use case and also a design that works in the majority of countries and markets.
I was personally part of a presentation in our booth together with one of our customer, Control, which do racing in 200 miles per hour, monitoring everything, communicating with the drivers, and latency is for sure important, but that's happening on top of LTE networks. You don't need 5G, I say, for that. So that's a good observation.
Just to add to that, if you think like a factory environment, and you have set up a proper edge compute solution, so your compute is very near the application.
Yeah.
We don't have any problem. We have different. I mean, I've been working quite a lot with private networks market and why that hasn't taken off faster, and it's not so much a technology problem. It's a go-to-market problem where we need to hook up with system integrators, solution companies, industrial specialists, and they need to sort of use 5G technology, and then there are many use cases. But right now, our industry, broadly speaking, network equipment providers, operators, are too connectivity oriented focused when they talk to enterprises. We are not. I'm not excluding Telenor IoT, of course, to talk about all the others, but generally, and we know very little about digital twins. It's not a core network technology. Provided by other people.
Cool. Picking up some questions from the audience here. Question about how do you expect commercial models from MVNOs and MNOs to evolve in the IoT space, particularly around deployment models, pricing structure, and everything like this. Is it too early to comment on that, or do you have any observations? I'm looking at Luciana and Seth now, maybe. How do you think it will play out? Personally, I think it's going to be the technology as such is a complement to the terrestrial networks, and maybe that will also influence the pricing models. What do you think?
I think the pricing models, they will not change to what they are today. I think if you have volumes and it is like a good business, then it will continue as it is, right? So, and I think what we're seeing more is that this is really an ecosystem. I think there is more opening for collaboration also between MNOs and MVNOs. So.
I think also it's a fast-moving world, so the collaborations needs to be there in order to be able to provide coverage in a good way, and I think also with as I said at the beginning, the increased amount of data that is needed will definitely rely on the MNO networks.
Sure.
And there needs to be investments in those networks in order to sort of facilitate this kind of data needs. So there has to be some kind of value, and I think also, as I said before, if there is a service disruption, that's going to have massive implications on the service you're providing. So it's very important that you have a value-focused discussion around what it is actually that you're providing. And then there are many things that goes with that, and that is data volumes, security, sort of operational stability, and those things as well.
Quality of service could be,
I think maybe insurance is the word of today. We talk about insurance in SGB 32. Investing in security is like an insurance. Now we talk about satellite networks as an insurance to coverage gaps. So probably runs through. Question here also from the audience. I'm going to direct that to you, Bengt. How do you see initiatives as GSMA Open Gateway and other initiatives will play a role moving forward? And that comes back to the API layers.
Yes. Well, I think my current take of that, I've been following that quite closely for various reasons. And I think, again, we have probably, as an industry, we have underestimated a bit of the IT stack and telco stack journey that operators need to transition through to properly be available to expose APIs to platforms. I think in Barcelona we noted very good progress. Aduna is doing well, connecting more and more APIs are coming out from Camara and so forth. But I think the best time for network APIs will probably be beyond 2030. That's when it's really available as a global platform, connect everyone and everywhere. Because it cannot go faster than the pace of how we evolve networks. So I'm sort of more optimistic about the addition, the value it will add for companies like Telenor IoT and your peers in the industry, differentiated services, slicing and everything else with it. It will come step by step. In terms of commercial impact, I'm less convinced. I think the research we do at Analysys Mason points to that end customer value, what we sell to end customers in 2030 is about 7.6 billion US dollars. And that's for an industry that has $1 trillion US dollars in revenues. And I think that, I've looked at some detail in that research. I think it's very credible. It's made bottom up, so it's sort of, it probably is in that range. And that probably means that the value comes from how you can differentiate services rather than it's a major revenue contributor.
It's interesting. Yeah. Looking through here the questions. So let's see if I get this question right. I hope so. Given recent development in MBB, as Bengt highlighted, to what extent do you foresee migration from the traditional MBB to dedicated IT connectivity for similar use cases? And how might this transition reshape market dynamics and the competitive position of MVNOs?
Well, that's normally what I charge $100,000.
Oh, wait.
And have a nice 60-page deck. So I hate to give that away. No, I'm not sure I fully understand the question. What I have picked up, and I think what this question is partly about, is what you have said a couple of times, Martin, is that you notice significant growth in data in your business.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So the legacy of the IoT industry is that it was a narrow band market, and that's sort of in the mindset of people. And then you are discovering, as bandwidth is increasing with technology, as compute capabilities in devices get stronger, we will consume a lot more data than we have done historically. And that means that IoT is, it's leaving the era of a pure narrowband business. So, but I don't think it changed the dynamics so much, because at the same time we are also increasing. I mean, if you take a normal operator that has in this era upgraded first to 5G and then to 5G SA, buying the latest network equipment from the leading vendors, then you are pretty good capacity-wise. You don't need to upgrade that much for the next few years. And that is sort of spilling over to your business as well.
Yeah.
It allows you without paying premium for mobile broadband.
No, I agree. And from my perspective, CTO, I need to build the capacity, of course. And I think, Luciana, you see from IoT Drive perspective, for instance, that we need to comply to certain regulation and others, but otherwise it can be done, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Automotives are becoming rolling mobile broadband.
Exactly. Yeah. And also services which are not traditional, like IoT services, right? It's converging into provision of infotainment and other types of services.
So time flies when you're enjoying yourself, and we're actually approaching the end of this session. I would like to end with a very, very short answer now, one by one. So when we meet here again in 1 year's time, what will be the standard feature in IT that was currently treated as cutting edge, but in 1 year's time will be de facto? You want to start, Seth?
Not sure if it's going to be de facto, but the thing that I'm looking most forward to sort of seeing how it has developed is definitely SGP32. I think with all the buzz that is around that in the market in general, sort of how fast has it been adopted, and also what kind of value has it achieved?
Yeah, for me, I think it is something related to agentic AI, something we're not even considering now, that it's, presenting new opportunities.
I'm with Seth here. I think the whole buzz around MWC, around eSIM, the demos, the launches, the new products coming, and then of course, most important, what sort of value it can add to manufacturing companies. That will sort of force very, very strong progression. So I agree with you, Seth.
I thought you would say 6G, but okay.
I was also thinking something, but it's next year, so
if you
can't
invite
forget
me
that.
2030.
Exactly. I was thinking the same. AI 2030.
It sounds like as a panel we are in agreement that it's more going to be SGP32 and maybe AI than satellite as de facto standard.
Sure.
Yeah.
but everything is quite interesting. Anyways, thank you very much for chiming into this webinar. Thank you so much for asking questions. And if you have additional questions afterwards, just reach out to your closest Telenor IoT peer, and we will definitely do our best to address that. With that, thank you to the panel.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin.